The woman appeared on his land like morning mist, silent and covered from head to toe in black fabric that revealed nothing but her hands and the soft sound of her breathing. Benjamin Hayes first spotted her near the creek that ran through his ranch, kneeling by the water as if in prayer. The heavy veil that covered her face moved gently in the Wyoming breeze, but she made no move to adjust it or acknowledge his presence. "Mom?" His voice carried across the meadow, rough from disuse. 3 years of living alone had made conversation feel foreign, but finding a veiled woman on his property demanded some form of communication. "You all right out there?" She turned toward his voice, but didn't lift her head. Even from 30 yards away, Benjamin could see the careful way she held herself, as if movement itself caused pain. She stood slowly, gathering the dark fabric around her like armor, and began walking away from him toward the mountains. "Wait!" Benjamin called, spurring his horse forward. "This is private land. You lost?" The woman stopped, but didn't turn around. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, refined and educated despite its broken quality. "I apologize for trespassing. I'll leave immediately." "Hold on now. Didn't say you had to leave, just asked if you were lost." Benjamin dismounted, keeping his distance, but close enough to see the tension in her shoulders. "Name's Benjamin Hayes. This is my ranch. I know who you are." The statement hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Benjamin studied the veiled figure, trying to place her voice or the careful way she held herself. Nothing was familiar, yet something about her presence felt significant in a way he couldn't explain. "Do we know each other?" "No, but I knew your wife." The words hit Benjamin like a physical blow. Nobody talked about Margaret anymore. The few neighbors who lived within riding distance had learned to avoid the subject after her death 3 years ago. Hearing her mentioned by this mysterious woman brought back the familiar ache in his chest. "Margaret's been gone 3 years. Who are you?" "Someone who owes her a debt that can never be repaid." The woman's voice cracked slightly. "I came to see where she lived, to understand the happiness she described in her letters." Letters. Margaret never mentioned corresponding with anyone from... "Where are you from?" "The East, Boston." The woman turned slightly, though the veil still hid her face completely. "Your wife saved my life once, Mr. Hayes. I've come to honor her memory, if you'll permit it." Benjamin's mind raced. Margaret had lived in Boston before they met, had worked as a governess for wealthy families before coming west to marry him. But she'd never spoken of anyone there who might travel across the country to visit her grave. "How did you know Margaret?" "I was one of her students. She taught me more than lessons from books, Mr. Hayes. She taught me how to survive when survival seemed impossible." The veiled woman began walking again, this time toward his house. Benjamin followed, his curiosity warring with the protective instincts that had kept him isolated since Margaret's death. Whoever this woman was, she carried herself like someone familiar with suffering, and her knowledge of his wife suggested a connection he couldn't ignore. "You can't just show up on my land talking about my dead wife and expect me to take your word for it," he called after her. "I don't expect anything, Mr. Hayes. I came to pay my respects and to give you something that belongs to you. After that, I'll disappear and you'll never see me again." "What could you possibly have that belongs to me?" The woman stopped walking and reached into her coat, pulling out a small wooden box worn smooth by years of handling. "Letters, ones she wrote but never sent. Ones that mention you by name, that speak of the love she found in Wyoming and the man who made her happier than she'd ever dreamed possible." Benjamin's breath caught. Margaret had been a prolific letter writer, always scribbling notes and observations in her flowing handwriting. But letters she'd never sent, letters that mentioned him. Why would she write letters and not send them? Because sometimes the act of writing is enough. Sometimes putting words on paper is the only way to process feelings too complex for speech. The veiled woman's voice carried the weight of personal experience. She wrote to me about her new life, her husband, her hopes for the future. I treasured every word. Then why didn't she send them? Because she was protecting me. Because receiving letters from Margaret Hayes of Wyoming could have gotten me killed. The stark statement sent a chill through Benjamin despite the warm afternoon sun. Whatever this woman's story was, it involved danger serious enough to make his gentle wife fear for someone's life. "Who are you?" he asked again, more gently this time. "Someone who learned too late that the people we love are more precious than the secrets we keep." The woman clutched the box of letters against her chest. "Someone who spent 3 years gathering the courage to make this journey, only to arrive and find I'm still too much of a coward to show my face." Benjamin studied the veiled figure, noting the way she held herself with rigid control, the careful distance she maintained, the pain that colored every word she spoke. Whatever had happened to her, whatever connection she'd had to Margaret, it had marked her deeply. "You came all this way to give me letters. I came to understand what Margaret found here, to see if the piece she wrote about was real, or just another beautiful lie we tell ourselves to make suffering bearable." Benjamin looked out over his land, seeing it through a stranger's eyes for the first time in years. The rolling hills, the clear stream, the modest house he'd built with his own hands, for the woman he'd loved more than life itself. "It was real," he said quietly. "The peace, the happiness, all of it. Margaret loved this place almost as much as she loved me." The veiled woman nodded slowly. "I'm glad. She deserved every moment of joy you gave her." As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains, Benjamin made a decision that would change everything. "You came all this way to honor Margaret's memory. The least I can do is offer you a meal and a place to rest before you continue on." "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose." "You're not imposing. You're accepting hospitality from someone who loved the same woman you're trying to honor." Benjamin gestured toward his house. "Besides, I'd like to hear more about these letters, about the woman my wife was before she became mine." The veiled woman moved through Benjamin's kitchen with surprising familiarity, as if she'd spent years learning the precise movements needed to prepare a meal without ever lifting the dark fabric from her face. She declined his offer to cook, insisting instead on preparing dinner herself while he tended to his evening chores. "Margaret always said that cooking was meditation," she said softly, her hands working efficiently despite the limited vision the veil must have provided. That the act of nourishing someone else was how she showed love when words weren't enough. Benjamin paused in the doorway, watching this stranger move through his home with Margaret's philosophy guiding her actions. She used to say that exact thing, word for word. She said many things that stayed with me. Her wisdom kept me alive during some very dark times. As evening fell, they sat across from each other at the small dining table Margaret had insisted on when they'd first built the house. The veiled woman ate carefully, lifting small forkfuls of food beneath the edge of her covering without ever fully revealing her face. "These letters," Benjamin said, gesturing to the wooden box that sat between them. "May I read them? They were meant for me, but they're about you, about the life you built together. I think Margaret would want you to have them now." Benjamin opened the box with careful hands. Inside were perhaps 20 letters, all written in Margaret's flowing script, all addressed to someone named Victoria. He selected one at random and began to read. "My dearest Victoria, today Benjamin surprised me with wildflowers he picked from the high meadow. Such a simple gesture, yet it filled my heart to overflowing. I wish you could see how gentle he is, how his rough hands can be so tender when he braids flowers into my hair. You asked me once if true love existed outside of novels. I can tell you now that it does, and it lives here in this wild, beautiful place with a man who sees my soul." Benjamin's voice trailed off, emotion tightening his throat. He'd never heard Margaret's private thoughts about their marriage, never known how deeply she'd felt the happiness they'd shared. "She loved you completely," the veiled woman said quietly. "Every letter spoke of you with such joy, such gratitude for the life you'd given her. Who were you to her? Really?" Victoria, for that was clearly her name, was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried years of carefully controlled pain. I was her student, as I said, but I was also in trouble, serious trouble. That Margaret helped me escape. What kind of trouble? The kind that happens to young women without family, without protection, when they trust the wrong people. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. Margaret found me after I'd been badly hurt. She nursed me back to health, helped me disappear, gave me a new name, and enough money to start over somewhere far away. Benjamin felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. That's why she couldn't send the letters, because someone was looking for you. Someone was looking for Victoria Ashford of Boston, but Victoria Ashford died in that room where Margaret found me. The woman who survived was someone else entirely. And now, are you still in danger? Victoria touched the edge of her veil unconsciously. I don't know. It's been 6 years since I disappeared. The man who hurt me may have forgotten I ever existed, or he may still be searching. I've been too afraid to find out. Is that why you wear the veil? To hide from him? I wear the veil because... Victoria's voice broke slightly. Because what he did to me left marks that never healed. Because I can't bear to see the horror in people's eyes when they look at me. Benjamin set down the letter he'd been holding, his understanding of this woman's pain deepening. Whatever violence had been done to her, it had left scars that went far beyond the physical. Margaret never mentioned your appearance in her letters, only your kindness, your intelligence, your strength in surviving what others wouldn't have endured. She was the only person who looked at me and saw a human being, instead of a victim or a monster. That's why I loved her. That's why losing her felt like losing the only light in a very dark world. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of shared grief settling around them like evening shadows. Benjamin found himself studying Victoria's posture, the graceful way she moved her hands, the careful dignity with which she held herself despite her obvious pain. How did you learn about Margaret's death? I hired investigators to check on her periodically, not to contact her, just to ensure she was safe and happy. 3 years ago, they reported that Margaret Hayes had died of fever, survived by her husband Benjamin. Victoria's voice grew softer. I wanted to come for the funeral, but I was still too much of a coward. You're not a coward. You're here now. I'm here because guilt finally outweighed fear, because I realized that honoring Margaret's memory mattered more than protecting my own shame. Benjamin reached across the table and gently touched Victoria's gloved hand. She didn't pull away, though he felt her tense at the contact. Margaret helped you when you needed it most. Now you've traveled across the country to honor her memory. That's not cowardice, that's love. That's exactly the kind of person she would have been proud to call friend. Victoria's breath caught audibly. I miss her so much. She was the only person who knew my real story and still believed I was worth saving. Then let me share something with you, Benjamin said, his voice gentle but firm. Tomorrow I'd like to take you to see Margaret's grave. She's buried on a hill overlooking the valley she loved. I think she'd want you to say goodbye properly. Victoria was quiet for so long that Benjamin thought she might refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I'd like that very much. The morning air was crisp as Benjamin led Victoria up the winding path to the hilltop where Margaret lay buried. The simple wooden cross he'd carved with his own hands stood against the vast Wyoming sky, surrounded by wildflowers that had grown naturally over the grave. Victoria moved slowly, her breathing visible in the cool air, the black veil fluttering with each step. She chose this spot herself, Benjamin said softly as they approached the grave. Said she wanted to watch over the valley forever, to see the cattle grazing and the seasons changing. Even in death, she wanted to be part of the life we'd built here. Victoria stopped several feet from the headstone, her entire body trembling. I don't know what to say to her. I've carried this conversation in my head for 3 years, but now, just speak from your heart. Margaret always said that's the only language that truly matters. For long minutes, Victoria stood in silence. The wind, the only sound on the hilltop. Benjamin watched her struggle with words that seemed too heavy for speech. understanding the weight of grief that could make even breathing feel impossible. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Victoria finally whispered. "I'm sorry I was too afraid to come. When you needed comfort, too broken to offer you the friendship you deserved. You saved my life, and I repaid you with silence and cowardice." She knelt beside the grave, her gloved hands touching the earth gently. "I've read your letters 1,000 times. Every word about the happiness you found here, about the man who loved you completely. I'm so grateful you had that joy, that you knew what it felt like to be cherished." Benjamin felt tears on his own cheeks as he listened to Victoria pour out years of accumulated guilt and love. There was something achingly familiar about her voice, something that tugged at memories he couldn't quite grasp. "Tell me about the woman you knew," he said gently. "Tell me about Margaret before she came west." Victoria looked up at him through the veil, and for a moment he thought she might remove it. Instead, she settled more comfortably beside the grave and began to speak. "She was the governess for the Ashford family, where I lived as a ward. Margaret saw immediately that I was being mistreated, but the family was powerful, influential. She couldn't simply rescue me without destroying her own life." Victoria's voice grew stronger as she shared memories. "So she began teaching me things beyond my lessons, how to be strong, how to survive, how to believe I deserved better than what I was receiving." "What happened to you?" "The eldest son, Richard Ashford. He considered me his property to use as he pleased. When I finally found the courage to refuse him, Victoria's hand moved unconsciously to her cheek beneath the veil. "He made sure I'd never be beautiful enough for any other man to want." Benjamin's hands clenched into fists. "Margaret found you after?" "Broken and bleeding in the servants' quarters, preparing to end my own life rather than endure another day of his attention." Victoria's voice steadied as she continued. "Margaret risked everything to help me escape. She used her own savings to pay for a doctor who would treat me without asking questions, then helped me disappear completely. And you've been hiding ever since." "I've been surviving. There's a difference." Victoria turned back to the grave. "Margaret taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, but sometimes it's all we can manage. She hoped I'd find the courage to truly live again someday. What would she want for you now?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her hands still touching the earth over Margaret's grave. "She'd want me to stop punishing myself for someone else's cruelty. She'd want me to believe that the scars on my face don't define my worth as a human being." "She'd be right. You say that, but you haven't seen what he did to me. The way people look at me when they see..." Victoria's voice broke. "I've become a monster, Benjamin. The kind of creature children have nightmares about." Benjamin knelt beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not so close as to frighten her. "Margaret fell in love with me, despite the scars on my hands from ranch work, despite the broken nose I got from a horse kick, despite every imperfection that made me human. She loved me not because of how I looked, but because of who I was beneath the surface. That's different. Your scars tell stories of honest work, of accidents that happen to good people. Mine tell the story of violence, of evil, of things too horrible for decent people to witness. Your scars tell the story of survival, of a woman strong enough to endure hell and come out the other side, of someone Margaret loved enough to risk everything to save." Benjamin's voice was firm but gentle. "They tell the story of courage, Victoria, not monstrosity." Victoria turned toward him, and for the first time since her arrival, Benjamin could see the outline of her face through the thin fabric. The right side appeared normal, but the left side was clearly damaged, marked by what must have been a knife or broken glass. "You're wrong," she whispered, "but thank you for trying to make me believe it." Benjamin reached into his coat and pulled out something he'd brought specifically for this moment. A small hand mirror, silver-backed and delicate, that had belonged to Margaret. She used to look in this every morning while I braided her hair. Said it helped her remember that she was loved, that she was beautiful, not because of her features, but because of the light in her eyes. He held it out to Victoria. Maybe it's time you remembered the same thing. Victoria stared at the mirror, as if it were a snake ready to strike. I can't. I haven't looked at my own reflection in 6 years. Then maybe it's time. Victoria stared at Margaret's mirror for what felt like an eternity, her hands shaking as she held it. The silver surface reflected only sky and clouds, waiting for her to find the courage to lift it to her face. "I used to be beautiful," she whispered. "Before Richard destroyed me, I had suitors, marriage proposals. I thought my face was my greatest asset. And now I know that beauty built on appearance alone crumbles at the first real test." Victoria's grip tightened on the mirror handle. "Margaret taught me that true beauty comes from surviving the unsurvivable, from choosing kindness when the world has shown you cruelty." Benjamin waited patiently beside Margaret's grave, understanding that this moment belonged entirely to Victoria. Around them, the Wyoming wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers, the same perfume that had welcomed Margaret to this place years ago. "She's still here, isn't she?" Victoria said suddenly. "I can feel her presence, like she's waiting to see what I choose." Margaret always believed that love doesn't end with death, that the people who matter to us stay with us in the choices we make, the courage we find, the way we treat others. Victoria raised the mirror slowly, stopping just before it would reveal her reflection. "What if I look and see a monster? What if 6 years of hiding haven't changed the reality of what Richard did to me? Then you'll see a survivor, someone strong enough to travel across a continent to honor a friend's memory, someone brave enough to trust a stranger with her deepest pain." Benjamin's voice was steady, certain. "You'll see exactly what Margaret saw when she looked at you, what I see when I look at you now. You can't see me. I'm covered by a veil. I can see your hands when you cook, gentle and skilled. I can see your posture when you listen, attentive and caring. I can see your spirit in every word you speak about Margaret, every moment of love and loyalty you've carried for 6 years." Benjamin moved closer, his voice soft but unwavering. "The veil doesn't hide who you are, Victoria. It only hides what was done to you. There's a difference." With a sharp intake of breath, Victoria lifted the mirror to her face and pulled back her veil. The left side of her face bore deep scars from her temple to her jaw, the kind of deliberate damage meant to destroy and humiliate. Her left eye was clouded, partially blind from whatever weapon Richard Ashford had used, but her right side remained untouched, and her eyes, both damaged and whole, held a strength that no amount of violence could diminish. "There," she said, her voice breaking. "Now you see the monster Richard created." Benjamin looked at her fully revealed face for a long moment, then reached out and gently touched the scarred side of her cheek. Victoria flinched, but didn't pull. "Away. I see a woman who survived hell and came back to honor her friend. I see someone with Margaret's same compassionate heart and unbreakable spirit." His thumb traced along one of the scars, not with pity but with reverence. "I see someone beautiful enough to make my wife risk everything to save her." Tears streamed down both sides of Victoria's face, unmarked and scarred alike. "How can you say that?" "Because it's true. Because Margaret saw it 6 years ago, and because anyone with eyes to really see would recognize it now." Benjamin smiled gently. "The face looking back at you in that mirror isn't the face of a monster, Victoria. It's the face of a hero." Victoria looked down at her reflection again, seeing herself clearly for the first time in 6 years. The scars were still there, would always be there, but alongside them, she saw something else: strength, kindness, the light that Margaret had insisted would never be extinguished. "I'm tired of hiding," she admitted. "I'm tired of letting Richard Ashford control my life from a distance." "Then don't. Stay here, help me run this ranch, let Margaret's memory live on through the friendship she wanted us to have." Benjamin gestured toward the valley spread below them. "Build a life worth living instead of just surviving." Victoria stood slowly, still holding the mirror, still wearing her scars like badges of honor instead of shame. Margaret would like that, wouldn't she? The two people she loved most taking care of each other. She'd love it, and she'd be proud of the courage you showed today. As they walked back down the hill together, Victoria felt lighter than she had in years. The veil hung loose around her shoulders, no longer a barrier between herself and the world. For the first time since that horrible night in Boston, she felt truly free. "Thank you," she said to Benjamin as they reached the ranch house, "for seeing me instead of my scars, for helping me remember who I was before Richard tried to destroy me. Thank you for coming, for bringing me those letters, for helping me understand how completely Margaret was loved by the people whose lives she touched." That evening, as Victoria prepared dinner with her face unveiled, she caught sight of herself in the kitchen window's reflection. The woman looking back at her was scarred but unbroken, marked by violence but defined by survival. She was no longer the monster she'd believed herself to be. She was Victoria Ashford, friend of Margaret Hayes, and she was finally ready to live. Again, what an incredible journey of healing and self-acceptance. Victoria's transformation from hiding behind a veil to embracing her scars as symbols of strength shows us that true beauty comes from courage, not perfection. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stories like Victoria's remind us that our scars tell stories of survival, not shame, and that healing happens when we find people who see our worth beyond our wounds. What did you think of Victoria's moment of courage at Margaret's grave? How powerful was Benjamin's response to seeing her scars? And what does this story teach us about the difference between surviving and truly living? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to check out our other inspiring stories about overcoming trauma, finding unexpected connections, and the healing power of human compassion. Next week, we'll share another incredible tale of courage conquering fear. Like this video if Victoria's journey inspired you, and remember that everyone carries invisible scars and everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are beneath the surface. See you in the next story, where broken people discover they're stronger than they ever imagined.